सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
The stations south of Medan Saleh are fortified with trenches and barbed wire. The traveller Ali bin Muhammad recorded in his diary as the state-of-the-art German-made Borsig locomotive thundered through the Hejaz desert. The dull thudding of distant artillery fire told us we were approaching our destination, he continued. Ever since the line was built, Bedouin gangs had been raiding the railway, plundering pilgrims and extracting protection money from the government. Each station was guarded by garrisons of troops. Ali ibn Muhammad, a model pilgrim, who was in fact the English spy A.J.B. Wavell, arrived in Medina in 1912 at the end of a long covert journey that had taken him through Beirut, Damascus and Jeddah. The Reconnaissance established what his masters needed to know. The Bedou remain whatever they have always been, independent tribes, each community having its own country, rulers, laws and customs, Wavell observed in his memoirs. For many past years, the Turks have found it less trouble to pay a certain sum of money to the sheikhs of the Bedou tribes, through whose country the pilgrim caravans have to pass, in return for immunity from attack. What did that mean? Ottoman power was just an illusion. An illusion a few gold pieces in the right place could easily dispel. This week, just over 100 years after the last trains ran on the Hejaz Railway, on the sidelines of the G20 summit, a coalition of the United States, Saudi Arabia and India announced its intention to develop new networks of train lines and ports across the region. Saudi already has a sophisticated rail network. Most people don't understand this, which it plans to expand across the region. Traffic will come through Kuwait and a new line being built along the coast of the United Arab Emirates. In 2017, then Israeli Transportation and Intelligence Minister Yisrael Katz had announced his country's intention to link the now Adani-owned port of Haifa through Jordan to the Saudi network. Perhaps that's finally happening. Though the United States-led Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment hasn't made maps available so far, the most likely route for the new network would be a new line cutting north from Jeddah and then forking west towards Haifa, exactly the route of the old Hejaz Railway. Future projects, it stands to reason, could head further north into Damascus and even Turkey, even though progress will depend on the obviously not quite there Israel-Saudi peace agreement being hammered out. Some of the fundamentals of the idea do seem evident from what's been talked about already. The bulk of the funding will come from Saudi Arabia, the UAE and the West, who are already building expansive railroad networks, with European technology and Indian companies providing the critical construction capabilities and human resources. Government media in China have already been decrying the project grumpily as a copycat of its own belt and road rail lines. Economic experts aren't all unanimous on the viability of this project, for a few reasons. China's much hyped train lines linking it to Europe through Central Asia were meant to be a game changer, but they remain unprofitable, Shin Watanabe recently reported, because while sending freight by sea might be slower, it is much cheaper. Few commodities justify the higher costs of rail where an option is available. The train line, expert Daniel Eagle has noted, would provide a security hedge if sea lanes in the Persian Gulf or Gulf of Eden are threatened or the Suez Canal is shut down. But it's a pretty costly hedge. And for Indians, there's no immediate payoff. Obviously, if you're sending a cargo from Mumbai to Europe, You wouldn't want to send it to the UAE first to be transshipped onto a railway system, then on to Haifa to be transshipped onto the sea, and yet again to Piraeus or a southern Mediterranean port where it would have to join the European railway system. It's a lot faster and cheaper just to send it to big European ports like Rotterdam or Hamburg. But the first great train race too was about geopolitics, not just the grubby business of turning a profit. And that, in some senses, was to prove its undoing. Like other contemporary empires, the Ottomans understood the transformative power of railways. The enormous agricultural hinterland of Aydin, if linked to the port at Izmir by something more reliable than camels, would find new markets. The empire's interests were not only economic. The train line would enable rapid troop movement to contain conflicts among Greek, Jewish and Armenian communities. In 1857, a British corporation was granted the right to build the railway with a guaranteed 6% return on its capital. A race to build rail networks through the desert had begun. Led by a consortium of Deutsche Bank, Deutsche Vereinsbank and Württemberg's Vereinsbank, German investors bought rail lines leading from Istanbul to Bulgaria and acquired the rights to build new routes towards oil-rich Kirkuk and Baghdad. The French, meanwhile, built a line from Jaffa, which is now in Israel, to Jerusalem. The British developed the route from Haifa port to Damascus. Finally, in 1901, the last Ottoman emperor to wield absolute power, Sultan Abdul Hamid II, announced the construction of a line from Damascus to Mecca, cutting through the Hejaz desert, which would be, in his words, a purely Muslim project built by Muslim engineers using only local materials. You see, the Sultan by this time had lost extensive territories with Christian populations, and now he wanted to consolidate his empire's Islamic character and credentials. What could be better than a rail line to Mecca? To the irritation of the British, historian Murat Ozyuksel has recorded in path-breaking scholarly work, funds began to be raised among Muslim communities in India. Muhammad Inshaullah, editor of the Al-Wakil in Amritsar and of Al-Watan in Lahore, campaigned for donations. The Imam of the Manarat Mosque in Mumbai, Abdul Haq Al-Azhari, princesses in Hyderabad and Allahabad, offered enormous sums for the construction of the railway. Inside years of the work beginning on the line though, Imperial Britain would be systematically blowing it all up, piece by piece. Thomas Edward Lawrence, the man who would do that, was born in 1888, the second of 5 sons in a comfortable Victorian family. The father, historian Irving Howe has rightly written, a reserved gentleman who is said to have never have written a cheque or read a book, devoted himself to domestic duties and a number of mild sports. Lawrence learnt in 1907 as quite a young man that he was in fact the illegitimate child of the Anglo-Irish baronet Sir Thomas Chapman. The discovery, some speculate, led him to leave Oxford after getting his degree and embed himself in what he saw as a purer Bedouin milieu. Fighting against Ottoman forces, Lawrence pioneered the use of highly mobile irregular forces backed by Gurkha troops from the British Indian Army and some amount of air power. Lawrence understood that targeting the rail line would degrade Ottoman logistics and make it very difficult for them to build up significant forces to counter his Bedouin irregulars. The charismatic leader himself claims to have personally blown up 78 bridges. Lawrence saw the Arab revolt in its political wholeness and moral dynamism, not merely as it was fouled by intrigue, cupidity and narrowness of spirit, but as it might become as an ideal possibility, Howe observes. Though Lawrence insisted on imagining the campaign as moved by the spirit of Arab nationalism, there's evidence that the massive bribery of tribes by the British had a pretty significant role in building the rebellion. Of course, the Ottomans before that had been doing pretty much the same thing. The military historian Rob Johnson has noted that Lawrence's campaign had its limits. Following its spectacular successes in 1916-1917, it slowed to a grinding stalemate as conventional forces were moved to the Western Front in Europe. Lawrence himself was captured and tortured by the Turks. In his memoirs, he recalls the experience with his captor thus, and I quote, "I remembered smiling idly at him, for a delicious warmth, probably sexual, was swelling through me. And then that he flung up his arm and hacked with the full length of his whip into my groin." For the rest of his life, historian Thomas J. O'Donnell writes, Lawrence would have problems forming adult relationships with women and suffered from a fixation with flagellation. Today, psychologists might attribute this to post-traumatic stress. The story is an awful reminder of the human costs paid by the soldiers of imperial wars, even those who, like Lawrence, emerged as cinematic heroes. The countries the wars were fought over fared little better. The Ottoman provinces outside the Arabian Peninsula were partitioned into British and French zones of influence. Abdul Aziz bin Abdul Rahman Al Saud set up a notionally independent Saudi Arabia, but one that was heavily dependent on Western patronage for its survival and remained educationally and socially backward. For their part, the last trains on the Hijaz line ran around 1920. Today, if you get the chance to visit Amman or Damascus, you can still see some of those engines as museum piece displays. But the route is mainly useful to archaeologists investigating Lawrence's campaign. Will the second great train race lock the Middle East into a new age of prosperity? Or again lead it to become mired in catastrophic great power contestation? The future will soon begin to be forged with steel and fire. What it'll look like, it's far too early to tell. I'm Praveen Swami and I'm National Security Editor of ThePrint. Thank you for watching Security Code.